Dee Thompson, and I'm a literacy coach in Fairfax County, Virginia.
And I'm Cassia Wedekind, and I am a math coach also in Virginia.
And today we are presenting Hands Down, Speak Out, Making Space for Student-Led Conversations in the Primary Classroom. And you'll see there we have a tiny URL for you to get to our handout if you'd like to get some extra materials and follow along. So thank you for joining us. Before we start, we'd just like to give you a little outline of our presentation. And we will start by sharing what a hands down conversation is and what makes a hands down conversation community. And then we'll talk a little bit about the why. Why would you make space for this kind of discourse? And the different times that we talk with our hands down, with our hands up, different formats that we like to talk in. And then we'll spend the majority of our time together with some practical tips about how you can get started, both in the virtual space and in the face-to-face classroom, so that it should be applicable to whatever environment you are teaching in right now. And we hope to spend some time with you, that this will be a joyful moment in what is right now a stressful time, and we can talk a lot about and celebrate how brilliant our students are. So let's start with what is a hands down conversation and a hands down conversation community. To do this, we're going to go back in time a little bit and just look at a short history of hand raising. So if we think about classrooms that we have participated in as students and that we have seen from our parents' and grandparents' days, there is a very common pattern of student talk that we are all familiar with, and that is raising our hands. And so we're going to just turn to some authoritative sources to help us understand this a little more, and that is Ridiculous Teachers in Modern Day Media. First, we have Ben Stein, who is playing the teacher in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And in this clip, you've probably seen how he asks his students for responses as he's droning on about economic tariffs. But he has become so accustomed to no one ever answering him that he just feebly says, anyone, anyone, and then goes ahead and answers himself. So in that clip, we see the teacher initiates a question. He kind of waits for a student response, doesn't bother, and just answers himself. The students obviously know that he knows the answer. And then we have this clip from School of Rock with Jack Black playing the teacher.
The first thing you do when you start a band is talk about your influences. That's how you figure out what kind of band you want to be. So who do you like? Blondie.
Christina Aguilera.
Who? No, come on. What? You, shortstop.
Puff Daddy.
Wrong. Billy.
Liza Minnelli.
What are you guys? This project is called Rock Band. I'm talking about bands that rock. Led Zeppelin. Don't tell me you guys have never gotten the lead out. Jimmy P.
All right, so in that clip, you got another glimpse at a very common teacher-student interaction. The teacher asks a question which he clearly has an answer in mind. He gets some student responses, he evaluates them, they're all wrong, and then he, again, completes the answer. So these are pretty ridiculous examples, but the basic premise of both of these examples is this idea, which Courtney Kasdan has named for us, called the initiate, respond, evaluate discourse pattern. And sometimes that is referred to as IRE. And the IRE pattern basically is just that back and forth. Everything goes through the teacher. Every interaction, student goes from teacher to student and back to the teacher. And this dominates classrooms even today. And it's a very archaic, very familiar, but very archaic way of speaking. And it's really something that's almost not relevant to the everyday world outside of the classroom. It's really only a classroom pattern of discourse. And it's problematic in many ways. And we have just a sampling of some research that indicates some of the problems with this pattern of discourse. And I'll just give you a minute to read this. So thankfully, there are many wonderful educators who are pushing against this pattern. And we have just a sampling of some of the educators that we have turned to in our career to learn about different ways of talking in classrooms. In intentional talk, we learn about how to allow space for productive grappling with math ideas through conversation between students. And in Not Light But Fire, Matt Kay explores the importance of building relationships so that we don't have to back down from important and sometimes difficult conversations. In Comprehension Through Conversation, Maria Nichols explores some of the elements that we can teach students about talk to build on the skills that they already come to school with. And in Choice Words, Peter Johnston grounds us in the philosophy that children are capable and powerful thinkers. So building upon this, we have the concept of hands down conversations. And basically what that is we tell the students there's no hand raising. You're going to listen for a place to slide your voice into the conversation. And there'll be one voice at a time, more or less. That's kind of a fuzzy rule because in real life, we sometimes talk on top of each other a little bit. And we really focus on learning how to listen to the person speaking and not waiting for the teacher to tell you what that other child said. And you can see in the classroom, in the face-to-face classroom, the format here is we like to try to gather the students in a circle. In this 5th grade class, you might have a little trouble finding the teacher. She's right here. Her name is Yolanda Senderas. And Yolanda is sort of positioning herself a little bit outside of the circle or as a member of the circle and demonstrating to the students that this is their conversation and she's listening in, maybe taking some notes and occasionally adding to the conversation. But Yolanda is giving the students a clear message that this is their conversation. So we want to give you a glimpse into a little video of a hands-on conversation. And this is one that took place in the face-to-face classroom. And we'll look later at how it looks in a virtual classroom. But before we watch the video, we want you to know what happened before this hands-on conversation that took place in a reading workshop. We had an interactive read aloud of this narrative nonfiction called Chameleon by Joy Kelly. And while we read that, we had several stopping points where I demonstrated some thinking and asked the students to turn and talk with their partners about the book. And the stopping points that I chose were either moments when I wanted them to they were important for them to understand the concept of the big idea of the book, or they were sort of a juicy part of the book that I thought could get at some debate that would be good to talk about. And then I did some listening in to those turn and talks and found some student quotes that I could launch the conversation with. And that's just one way to launch a conversation. And the particular page that really got a lot of kids talking was this one, where the chameleon, after spending most of the book trying to avoid being eaten, suddenly becomes the predator himself and eats this caterpillar in this very graphic, awesome picture. And when I was listening in to 2 students, one of them said, the chameleon is being so mean at this point. And her partner responded, no, this is natural. That's what chameleons are supposed to do. And so I thought right there, that was the debate. That was worth bringing to the whole class. And that's how we launched our hands down conversation. So we're going to watch that video now. And while you're watching, take a moment to notice and note to yourself, what evidence of listening do you see amongst the students? And consider how that listening may look different than what we typically think of as school appropriate listening. Just try to stretch yourself there. And what kinds of talk are the students exploring about the book?
Okay, so yesterday we talked about that and we had these two big ideas. Is the chameleon bad?
No.
Because he ate that caterpillar and the caterpillar, like Nahal said, was going to become a butterfly. Or, like Alejandro said, is the chameleon being natural? Who would like to start us off thinking about that? Is the chameleon bad or just being natural? Okay, and I know Brianita has been working on getting her voice in, so let's have her start, and you can speak into the space when she's ready about, when she's finished with her idea.
I think the legs will be natural. A lot of like insects, like animals will eat other animals. I think that it's natural for animals to eat other animals. I think it's normal for the lizard, the chameleon, to eat the caterpillar because it's natural, and animals need something to eat. I think that the chameleon has to be careful with that dangerous animal that we saw in the book because it could hurt the chameleon. I think that the chameleon is he's eating the caterpillar because he doesn't know if he's going to turn into a butterfly. I think I agree with Nicholas because the butterfly wants to be a butterfly. I think that it's natural because it's sort of their diet. It's what they eat. I think it was bad for the chameleon to eat it because all it has been through. Now it eats its own prey, but all those other animals, think he was a dirt place. I'm trying to say, with all that he's been through, that's what he does. It's natural for animals. Different animals eat different little kinds of animals. Like food chain.
So what I hear is a lot of you are saying that this is just how animals work. But Isaiah's saying, let me see if I got this right, Isaiah, that the chameleon was so scared it was going to get eaten, right? It was scared and it was scared and it was scared and it went through all of that, and then it just ate the caterpillar anyway. After all it had been through, it was so scared that it was going to be eaten, and then it ate. So there's something there that's kind of interesting to think about. Can you turn just real quick to your neighbor and talk about that? What do you think about that? After all it had gone through, worrying about being eaten.
So I hope that you enjoyed seeing that and getting a glimpse into those wonderful little people's ideas. This is from Kelsey Friend's first grade class. And I don't know what you picked out, but as I was listening, I noticed that there were there was one little boy that you could see on the screen, and I was filming this on a tripod, so I apologize for the amateur videography, but the one little boy that you could see who sneezed a lot, and he was definitely doing all this moving around and sort of playing with his body and that kind of thing that little kids do, right? And a lot of times as teachers, it kind of drives us crazy, and we're like, they're not listening if they're not sitting still. But then he chimes in with that point and says, it's a food chain. He's adding on and giving the name to what his classmate across the way was trying to say with, this is natural, like this is what animals are supposed to do. And I just think about that a lot, because when I'm watching little kids and thinking, oh, they're moving around so much, they must not be listening, and then you see that evidence, it makes you realize that that's how their bodies are working, and it doesn't always mean that they're necessarily off task.
So we're going to spend just a minute thinking about why make space for hands-down conversations in the classroom before we get into the practical how. And let's see this chart. There we go. So this is a chart, and it's also in the handout if you want to take a little longer and look at it as well. And this chart compares that pink column of kind of some practices and some characteristics of traditional classroom discourse versus what we're trying to aim for in a hands-down conversation community. And we know that putting our hands down, having these conversations without raising hands is an important characteristic of a hands-down conversation community, and it's an important symbol, but it's not the only part of a hands-down conversation. And we know that actually that if we were just to tell kids to put their hands down and that's all we were to do, that actually we might see the same inequities and power dynamics that we see in traditional classroom discourse replicated in the hands-on conversation as well. So there's a lot more work to be done and a lot more goals to be set for a hands-on conversation as well. And we're going to zoom in on just one of them, one of these rows, where we think about how classroom discourse is traditionally, like Christy was saying in the beginning, a kind of conversation where the teacher's voice is the most powerful and the most important. The teacher asks all of the questions, and it's the children's job to respond and the teacher's job to evaluate. And that kind of conversation empowers the teacher, may empower some students whose discourse patterns most match that of school discourse. But we also know that it's not a helpful kind of discourse for the community and for many students. And so what we're aiming for in hands-down conversation is preparing students for conversation in the real world and making school talk more like real life talk, where kids have to do the dance of listening and talking to each other back and forth without relying always on the teacher to do that work for them. And they're thinking about things from different perspectives, like you saw first graders doing about the chameleon, and engaging with each other's ideas, pushing up against each other's ideas. And that's really what we hope for people, adults and children out in the world. And that's one of our goals in hands-down conversations as well. So sometimes when we get started with the work of hands-down conversations, people think that they need to have every single conversation in their classroom be a hands-down conversation. And that's actually not what we're aiming for in a hands-down conversation community. So there's different formats or contexts of talk, and these are a few of them here. These are all pictures of in-person classrooms, but we're going to talk a little bit about them in online learning as well. So lots of our conversation work happens in smaller groups, in turn and talks or in conversation clubs, which is the word that or the phrase that we give for two turn and talk partners that come together for a small group. And that gives students opportunities to try out new talk and listening moves and get more ideas out in a smaller space. So in the classroom, we might do that just like you see there, or in the online world, we might be working in a breakout room or in small groups with students like you'll see in a few minutes. And then we have the hands-on conversation like the one that you saw in the first grade classroom. And then there's also opportunities for conversations with hands. Sometimes when the teacher wants to gather a lot of ideas in a quick way, gather a bunch of different perspectives from students and maybe record them, using hands can be a helpful way to do that in an efficient way. And sometimes when the teacher is doing a conversation where there might be heavy recording, it might be more practical to pace the conversation by calling on hands. So not all conversations need to be a hands-down conversation with the whole group. There's lots of formats for trying on natural talk and teaching students talk and listening moves in various settings in the classroom, online and in person.
So we're going to share 4 tips with you for getting started in this work, or if you've already been playing with this, how to continue that work in new settings, especially online. So we're all at the beginning of the school year right now, and our first tip is really to make space for social conversations. And especially when we're trying to build a community at a distance, whether it be in the classroom 6 feet apart instead of in a nice tight circle, or through the computer, when we are able to use social conversations, and by that we mean equal access, easy access topics that are about everyday, non-academic type things, then we really get to know our students as speakers and as conversationalists before we start layering in the academics. And that is a way to help us get to know them as individuals, and to build community, but also to make sure that we are able to value some of the talk skills that students have without judging them first as a reader or as a mathematician. And that really helps us see our students as whole people. So some of the ways that we've been trying that out in the online environment is by using a visual, such as this one, and asking small groups to have conversation about it. So we're going to show another video now of a group of 2nd graders from Wendy Welch's class. And this was taken last spring when we were moved to a distance learning virtual environment. We showed the students this very old book, which is available on openalibrary.org for free, and has a bunch of these silly would you rather questions in it. This one, if you can't see the print, says, would you rather be crushed by a snake, swallowed by a fish, eaten by a crocodile, or sat on by a rhinoceros? And although in the spring we weren't starting new, we already had a community, we were relearning how to talk to each other through a computer. So we started again with social conversations as we rebuilt our community. And now that I'm at the beginning of the school year working with students, I'm doing that same thing again. And it's also just joyful, which is really important, especially during this time, to talk about silly things and to laugh together, and to consider things like what would be the most awesome superpower, and enjoy each other as people. So here's a small group of 2nd graders who had experience talking in hands-on conversations, including whole class and small groups, and now are moving into an online environment and talking about what they want to be killed by, essentially. And this little boy is starting in on why he thinks it would be better to have a fish attack him after 2 of his classmates have just said that they think a snake would be better.
I'd rather be swallowed by a fish. Because to be swallowed by a fish because that really that skin is not that hard, so you could probably easily just escape from like trying to scratch the skin out, and then you could get escaped from that, and then you and then that's all. And fish are really small. Well, not all fishes are strong, but some fishes are small. So if it was a small fish, then it would probably just swallow a toad from you. Probably nothing. But how are you supposed to swallow a fish? What? Yeah. So how are you supposed to be swallowed by a fish? And it's a fish like medium or like tall? Yeah. Because medium, you don't really, like, you can get swallowed. But only if you have, like, a dangerous weapon to get out of the fish, then, then you can be alive. But, because their, like, mouths are so small. Yeah, like, their mouths are so small. If it was like a giant fish, then the mouth would be really big. So there's a thing, but the such thing as a fish. It's really it's brownish, and fishermen have catched it that they can't even bring it onto their boat.
You guys might have noticed Noel is trying to get his voice in, so one of you could also invite him into the conversation by saying, Noel, what do you think?
Like our group meeting.
Try inviting him in.
Noel, what do you think? I think the snake would be better than the fish because the fish would swallow you, but snakes that don't eat humans. Snakes only eat different kinds of snakes. I think really true. They people. They rarely do. Rarely. Yeah, that means they do, but not often. So, what happened? And mostly if it was a venomous snake, it wouldn't just kill you by eating it or kill you by its venom. True. And by its venom, it would bit you. Noelle, what did you say? I said I would rather go for the snake. Snake? Oh, I said that too, and Stacy did. Me too.
So you may have noticed a lot of just delightful reasoning in that one is really what sticks out to me when I'm listening to that, about how wonderfully all of those students are doing, kind of backing up their opinions. And you can just imagine how that will translate when they're speaking about math, when they're speaking about their thinking, when they're reading, because they recognize the importance of explaining their thinking and not just sharing. And there was also such nice interactions between the students there as they worked to understand each other, to add on to each other. There's just so much going on there, even though it was a very silly topic that can be built upon in more academic conversations. And so we really suggest, as you're getting started with the school year, to spend some time with these social conversation topics. We have some different ideas that are some ways that we've been playing around with to help get the conversations going, especially when the students don't know each other as well at the beginning of the year. Sometimes the talk can be a little quiet. And so by sharing some of these interactive slides with students, one thing that I've been doing is after they have a chance to play around with the slides and mark what they're thinking, then you as a teacher can check out the slides and notice, oh, okay, here's somewhere that there's a lot of disagreement, and then pull that slide up and say, so guys, can you talk about the different sides here? Or today I was using the video game one and there was a lot of agreement on that side. And I said, okay, so convince me as the parent why video games are so good for kids. You guys are all in agreement on this. So talk together and see if you can work through some of the reasoning there. And get the conversations going like that, start to build those communities amongst your students. We would like to share some of these with you. So if you check out that tiny URL on the bottom of the screen, you can check these out and adapt them, you know, copy them and use them in your own online learning environments. And if you find a way to use these or to adapt them, we would love to hear about what you do. And please find us on Twitter and share what you're trying out.
So our second tip is to listen for who students are as talkers and as people. And that sounds like an obvious tip that we should be listening to our students. But listening as a teacher can be difficult. There's a great quote by Alfie Kohn who says, great teachers have teeth marks on their tongues. So it is tempting to jump in with your voice because that has been the traditional role of the teacher, to be the sole facilitator of the conversation. So we use a couple of tools. I call them jobs that I give myself when I'm listening to students across different kinds of conversations, in social conversations, in academic conversations, in synchronous conversations, and we'll talk in a minute about how we might listen in asynchronous conversations. And these tools help us reflect on how students are talking and listening to each other, and what steps we might take next to help them grow as listeners and talkers. So one tool is just to take a quick transcript. So during a hands-down conversation in person or online, I might break eye contact with students as kind of a signal to students that they should be looking at each other and talking to each other instead of just at me. And then just try to capture as much by hand of the conversation that I can, knowing that I'm never going to be able to keep up usually with students' talk, but I can capture some quick notes on the big ideas. And then after the conversation, when I'm thinking about planning my next conversation, I might look and see who was talking a lot, who was not talking a lot, what kinds of ideas came up academically or socially, what kinds of talk were they using, and how might I help students build on their content ideas and as talkers and listeners. And then another tool that we use often in the beginning of hands-on conversations when we're just getting started is what we call a conversation map. And a conversation map is a tool where we just draw a circle that represents the circle that we're sitting in physically when we're in the classroom, or just represents our group together when we're virtual. And then putting students' names around that circle. And then when the conversation starts, I just draw a line from who starts the conversation to who talks next, to who talks next, to who talks next. And we'll see in this next slide kind of what that looks like. And this tool allows us to notice patterns of participation in the whole group conversation. Now, this doesn't capture what students are saying in their turn-in talks. We almost always have turn-in talks as to start or end or in the middle of a hands-down conversation, but this offers us one glimpse, one piece of data about conversations. So you can see in this classroom, this was one of the first hands-down class conversations this class had. It's really unbalanced. There's a lot of students, a lot of girls we noticed, and a lot of English learners who didn't talk at all in this conversation. And there were a lot of students who dominated the conversation and had a lot of power in the conversation. You can see that a lot of talk went through Kevin here. And then after we've had, let's see, look at the next slide. So those are all the students who did not talk at all in this conversation. And here's some students that talked a lot in this conversation. So we can use this as a tool to do some noticing as teachers. And we can notice that we know that in all social situations, in all communities, there are power dynamics, and there is there's status, and some students might have more status within that class than others for various reasons. And we can just notice who has a lot of power in that classroom and who has status. And we can think about who is considered to be smart in the class, not because of something that we're doing intentionally, but because of a lot of different factors, and whose ideas are deferred to. And then we can think about why that might be in general and perhaps specifically in our classroom. And we can think about how we can disrupt these inequities that we notice. And one way that we can do this is by reflecting as a classroom community and saying, we want to have a classroom community where everyone can feel comfortable adding ideas. And we want to hear from everybody because everybody has important ideas to add. We want to hear from everybody who would like to talk in the conversation. And so we teach a dialogue micro lesson, we call it, on this idea. So we might say, you should think about your voice in this conversation that we're having. And you can think about, am I someone who's talking a lot in this conversation, or am I someone who is not talking a lot in this conversation? And I might make a goal for myself. If I'm someone who's talking a lot, I might make the goal of inviting someone else in, as you saw Christy encouraging her students to do in that video. Or I might make a goal of listening and just holding on to my thought and letting other people enter the conversation. Or if I'm having a hard time getting my voice into the conversation, I want to get my voice into the conversation and I'm just not sure how to break in, or I'm feeling unsure of my idea, I might make a goal myself to share one idea. It's important to note that we're not using these conversation maps to compel or force students to participate. We never do that in a hands-down conversation. We don't tell students how often they have to participate, but we want to make space for students who want to participate in the conversation to do so. And we find that most students want to, at some point, participate in the conversation. And so here's another conversation map from that same class, just a couple of conversations later. And you'll see that even within just a week or so of working with hands-down conversations and having these reflections as a class, some patterns have shifted a bit. So there's more participation overall. Some of our English learners who were having a hard time getting their voice in, finding the space, were able to get their voices in, both because they were thinking about how they might get their voice in, and because other kids gave them the space to do that and were ready to listen to their ideas. And it's not perfect. There's still students that don't participate in every conversation, and that's not our goal, that everyone participate in every conversation. And there's still students that like to talk a lot, and that's just how people are out in the world too. So our goal is a more equitable distribution of voices in a conversation, and not that everyone's participating exactly equally. So our third tip is to use tools in ways that prioritize kid-to-kid interaction. And so we're all getting used to a lot of new tech tools online, as many of us are teaching online. And one tool that we wanted to highlight today, because it's an asynchronous tool and it's helping us expand our understanding of conversations. I think that most of us previous to last March thought of conversations as the kind of conversations we would have face-to-face in the classroom. And now Christy and I are really thinking about what do hands-on conversations mean when we're all online. So this tool is Flipgrid, which some of you may be using and familiar with. And it's an asynchronous tool that the teacher can record a question or a prompt and through a video, and students respond through videos. And one of the reasons that we're interested in using it is that it actually offers some advantages over in-person conversations. Oftentimes we think of tech as trying to replicate in-person interactions, but there's actually some tech tools that might have offer some different advantages than in-person conversations. So an advantage that Flipgrid has is that it's not all happening at once. In a classroom, conversation is bouncing back and forth very quickly, and it might be hard for some kids to find their way into that conversation. But in Flipgrid, I can listen to what a friend has said over and over again if I want. And we found when we were experimenting with this summer that kids like to listen to their friends more than one time as they were generating their own thoughts about how they might respond. We also like this tool because there's a comment feature. You can see it really little there, and you'll see in the video in a moment where I can talk back to a video that my classmate has made. So one person says one thing, and then I can record a video responding to my classmate. And then something that I think we're all thinking about with online now is that Flipgrid allows kids to add emojis and filters and special effects and all those things that kids and adults like to use. And we kind of love that aspect of it because in a time where kids sometimes don't have a lot of control over their lives and maybe feelings of agency, this allows them like this little moment of like, I'm gonna have a rainbow filter, or I'm gonna use this poop emoji or ghost emoji to express myself here. And we wanna find ways that we can open that up to students instead of trying to shut that down all the time. And if you're interested in Flipgrid, we've been learning a lot on Twitter about Flipgrid from two great educators, first grade teacher Lauren Carr and science educator Carolyn Colley, who are doing really interesting stuff with Flipgrid and often post about it. So we're gonna watch just a quick little video here it's a screen recording of a few kids responding to another page in that Would You Rather book. So you can see, so you can notice how the kids are responding to each other and kind of what talk moves they're using, even though they're not talking to each other synchronously.
Hi everyone, today I have a question and I'm really curious to hear what you think about it. It's a would you rather question. Here it is. Would you rather jump in the brambles for 25 cents, like this person, swallow a dead frog for 50 cents, like this person, or stay all night in a creepy house for $1, like this person? Record a little video letting us know your idea about which you would rather do and tell us why. And then you can listen to other people's videos and comment on their ideas too.
My choice would be stay in a spooky house for $1 because I would just take down the spooky stuff and then it wouldn't be scary at all. But if it wasn't scary at all, if it was just things that popped up that were like pumpkin heads, I would keep them there. It would be like funny and not scary at all. I agree with Lulu because that's the most money. And I would just, yeah.
So I agree with you. You could just take down everything spooky in the house. That would be pretty smart. Bye. Okay, okay, now let's do the next button.
I would go in the spooky house because it would be the most money and then I could buy whatever I wanted. Because I like money. I would, how will you get money anyway? What would you spend your money on?
and spend it on a Hatchimal pillow.
So in that video, you could see each other using those same talk moves, pushing back on each other's ideas, agreeing and disagreeing. And you could see their emojis, and one student who doesn't appear, their face doesn't appear at all because that was their choice, to put an emoji over it. And a really good blog post by Ariel Johnson is she's talking about the chat box. So she's talking about another tool that increases kid-to-kid talk. And she's talking about how we shouldn't shut down the chat box, and we should see the chat box as an opportunity for students to talk to each other. And sometimes we want to control that because it might get silly, and she says they will be silly because they're children, but that a lot of engagement and a lot of ownership can come out of those places too. And instead of trying to shut them down, we should be looking for ways to harness their power and appreciate the talk that's going on there. So our last tip is to explore dialogue microlessons, and we touched on that just a little bit earlier. So a dialogue microlesson is what we consider a pulling back of the curtain on some ways that dialogue works to help students in an explicit way grow in their listening and talking skills. They're short and they follow a predictable structure of explaining what the dialogue move is, why we want to use this in conversation, and then how we might try it out. And then there's an opportunity to try it out in small groups or with the whole class. So this is one chart from a dialogue microlesson where the teacher was orienting students to the idea that when we say an idea, we can give our reasoning behind our ideas. And sometimes we offer students an idea about how they might say that. You might say, I think, and your idea because, but we also are careful to point out that they have lots of ways of talking about their reasoning and that they might not always use this sentence stem because children have ways of talking that are brilliant that don't always include the sentence stem that we might use. So dialogue microlessons always build on what students are already doing. So when we're planning them, we think about what are these students already doing in their talk? And so what are they ready for next? What's the next step as they grow as listeners and talkers? And then what microlesson could help them give them some practice with that and grow? So here's some lessons from our book, Hands Down, Speak Out. And if you think back to the conversation that Christy's second graders were having online when they were talking about what they'd rather be killed by the snake or the fish, they were doing a lot of these talk moves already. There was a point where someone asked another person a question, like, what did you choose again? There was a point they were comparing their ideas. I chose the snake, I chose the fish. They were adding on to each other's ideas as they went along. So we can kind of notice what things they're already doing, and then that might help us think about what they're ready for next. So there's not just one right answer. There's a lot of things that might help them grow as talkers and listeners. So we might choose this idea, 6.6 there, revising an idea. And this is a chart that you might use from that. So we thought they might be ready for thinking about how what someone else says might cause you, or some new information that you get might cause you to change your idea either completely or in some small way. And talking about that out loud helps us all grow as thinkers. So we might do a little micro lesson around that idea and then ask students to try it out in the next conversation if it comes up naturally for them. And we might try to orchestrate a situation or a particular conversation where there might be opportunities for revising ideas. So we're just ending here with this quote from Paulo Freire, thinking about how online and in person, we want to have talk and listening communities that mirror the kind of communities that we want in our world and in our democracy. now and in the future. And we have so much work to do as a country and as a world and thinking about this. And we want school to be a place where that kind of action can take place right now. So thank you for joining us. We'd love to hear about what you're trying out in your classrooms, and you can get in touch with us through email or on Twitter. And if you're interested in these ideas, we also have some recent blog posts and videos up on our blog to check out as well. So thank you for joining us, and we hope to hear from you.
Thanks. Bye.